Why is Singapore stuck between the US and China? It is not even a question. Because Singapore should not exist at all. The right question should be, how can Singapore survive? It is a tiny island, smaller than New York City. No oil. No natural resources. No farmland. And yet today it has one of the most powerful passports on Earth. One of the busiest ports in the world. And supposedly, one of the most advanced militaries in Asia. But here is the crazy part. For decades, this tiny country pulled off something almost impossible. It stayed close friends with both the United States and China. Two superpowers. Two rivals. Two countries are now heading toward a historic confrontation. And Singapore sits right in the middle. If the rivalry explodes, Singapore may be forced to make the most dangerous choice in its history. To understand why, we need to go back to the moment Singapore was born. Because from the very beginning, survival looked almost impossible. In 1965, Singapore was expelled from Malaysia. Suddenly, it was alone. A small island with no resources. A population divided by race and language. And larger neighbors that were not exactly friendly. Many people believed the country would collapse within a few years. But Singapore had one leader who refused to accept that. Lee Kuan Yew. He understood something brutal. Small countries cannot survive by being weak. But they also cannot survive by acting like big powers. So he invented a strategy. A strange one. He said Singapore should become what he called a poisonous shrimp. Small. But so dangerous that nobody would want to swallow it. The idea was simple. If attacking Singapore became too costly, nobody would try. So Singapore built a powerful military, disproportionate to its land size. It built one of the most efficient economies on Earth. And most importantly, it connected itself to the entire global system. Trade. Finance. Shipping. Technology. If Singapore disappeared, the world would feel the shock. That was the plan. But there was one more trick. Instead of choosing sides in global politics, Singapore would work with everyone. Be a friend to all. Be a servant to none. During the Cold War, most countries chose a camp. America or the communist world. Singapore refused. It welcomed American companies. It cooperated with Western militaries. But it also built ties with Beijing long before China became an economic giant. It even maintained a good relationship with Taipei without inviting severe criticism from the Chinese mainland. For decades, this balancing act worked perfectly. The United States provided security in Asia. Its navy kept shipping lanes open. That stability allowed global trade to explode. China, meanwhile, was growing into the factory of the world. And Singapore plugged directly into that growth. So the system had two pillars. America protected the region. China powered the economy. Singapore stood safely between them. Until recently. Because now the relationship between Washington and Beijing is changing fast. The competition is no longer quiet. It is becoming a full geopolitical rivalry. And when two giants start pushing against each other, the countries in the middle feel it first. Singapore is one of those countries. And the pressure is building. First, there is the American pillar. Singapore and the United States are not formal allies. But their security relationship is incredibly close. In 1990, the two countries signed an agreement allowing American forces to use Singapore's bases. That deal has been renewed again and again. Today it runs until at least 2035. One base in particular is crucial. Changi Naval Base. It is one of the only ports in Southeast Asia capable of hosting massive American aircraft carriers. That makes it a key stop for the U.S. Navy. American warships regularly rotate through the port. Advanced littoral combat ships operate there. U.S. surveillance aircraft fly from Singaporean airfields, watching the South China Sea. But the partnership goes even deeper. Singapore's military is heavily equipped with American technology. Its Air Force flies F-15 and F-16 fighter jets. It is preparing to receive stealth F-35 fighters. Its army operates Apache attack helicopters. And Singaporean forces train constantly with the U.S. military. In fact, Singapore runs one of the largest foreign military training programs inside the United States. Around 1,000 Singaporean personnel are trained there at any given time. Pilots train in Arkansas. Ground forces conduct exercises in Idaho. Over the decades, this created deep trust between the two militaries. But Singapore does not support the U.S. just out of friendship. Geography explains everything. The island sits at the entrance to the Strait of Malacca, one of the most important shipping routes on Earth. A massive share of the world's trade and oil passes through this narrow passage. If those waters were blocked, Singapore's economy would collapse. So, from Singapore's perspective, the U.S. Navy provides something priceless: stability. A balance of power that prevents any single country from dominating the region. But while America is the foundation of Singapore's security, China is something else entirely. China is the center of the global economy. For more than a decade, China has been Singapore's largest trading partner. And the relationship is massive. Singapore is also one of the largest foreign investors in China. Singaporean companies help build Chinese cities, finance Chinese projects, and manage international investment. The cooperation goes back decades. In 1994, the two countries launched the Suzhou Industrial Park. Singapore helped design the entire development model. Later came the Tianjin Eco-City, a massive experiment in sustainable urban development. Then came an even bigger project, a huge logistics and trade network linking Western China to global markets through Singapore. This system connects Chinese inland cities, such as Chongqing, to international shipping routes. It turns Singapore into a gateway for Chinese trade. And this fits perfectly with China's giant global infrastructure plan, the Belt and Road Initiative. Singapore does not just participate. It helps finance the entire system. Its banks provide funding. Its legal system handles complex contracts. Its financial markets connect investors. In many ways, Singapore has become the financial hub for China's overseas expansion. But here is the key point. Singapore does not support China because of its culture. Though most Singaporeans are ethnically Chinese. But Singapore's leaders are extremely clear about one thing: national interest comes first. The relationship with China is purely strategic. China is the fastest growing economic force in the world. Ignoring that reality would be economically suicidal. So Singapore embraced it. For years, the American security pillar and the Chinese economic pillar coexisted. But now those pillars are starting to collide. And the cracks are showing. The first pressure point is the South China Sea, one of the most important waterways on Earth. China claims most of it, using the traditional 9-line. Now the 10-line. Many countries reject this claim, including the United States. American warships regularly sail through the area to challenge China's position. These operations often involve forces operating from Singapore, which creates a very awkward situation. Singapore depends on open shipping lanes. It supports international maritime law. But openly opposing China could damage its relationship with its biggest trading partner. So Singapore walks a careful line, defending international rules, without directly confronting Beijing. The second flashpoint is even more explosive. Taiwan. Officially, Singapore follows the One China policy. It does not recognize Taiwan as an independent country. But there is a hidden twist. For nearly 50 years, Singapore has trained troops in Taiwan. The program is known as Project Starlight. Because Singapore is so small, it lacks large training grounds. Taiwan offered space for major military exercises. So thousands of Singaporean soldiers are trained there every year. China strongly dislikes this arrangement. It has pressured Singapore to stop. At one point, Chinese authorities even seized Singaporean armored vehicles passing through Hong Kong after training exercises. It was widely interpreted as a warning. Yet Singapore has refused to end the program. For them, military readiness is non-negotiable. But this balancing act becomes more dangerous every year, especially as tensions over Taiwan continue rising. Then there is the third battlefield: technology. The United States and China are now fighting for dominance in semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and advanced manufacturing. Washington has imposed strict export controls on advanced chips bound for China. It wants to slow China's technological rise. For Singapore, this creates a nightmare. Its economy is deeply integrated with both sides. Singapore hosts major semiconductor production facilities. It sits in the middle of global supply chains. If companies are forced to choose between US technology and Chinese markets, Singapore gets squeezed. Businesses may have to reorganize entire supply networks. Investments become uncertain. Growth slows. The system Singapore has built over decades is suddenly under pressure. And the problem keeps growing. Because the rivalry between the two superpowers is not fading. It is intensifying. Singapore's leaders know this. But they also know something else. Choosing a side would be disastrous. If Singapore chose the United States completely, it could damage its economic relationship with China. If it chose China, it could lose its independence and security guarantees. So Singapore is trying something incredibly difficult. Staying neutral. But not passive. Active neutrality. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong explained the goal clearly. Singapore does not want a world where it can only have one friend. Instead, it wants many best friends. To make this possible, Singapore is doubling down on three strategies. First, military strength. The modern version of the poisonous shrimp. Singapore continues to invest heavily in advanced defense technology. A small country, but a dangerous one. Second, defending international rules. Small countries depend on global law. When rules matter, size matters less. Singapore constantly pushes for a stable, rules-based order. That is why Lawrence Wong flatters Japan as the leader of security in Asia, even if he may not think so from the bottom of his heart. Third, remaining valuable to everyone, catering to different groups. In 2015, Xi Jinping and Ma Ying-jeou, two Chinese leaders from Beijing and Taipei, met here for the first time in China's modern history. Singapore also wants to be the place where business happens, where negotiations happen, where global finance flows, where ships pass. If both superpowers need Singapore, neither will want to destroy that relationship. But the big question remains: how long can this balancing act last? As tensions rise, both Washington and Beijing increasingly want loyalty, not neutrality. And if a crisis erupts, especially over Taiwan, Singapore could face a choice it has tried to avoid for 60 years. A tiny island, Singapore, is caught between two giants. For decades it mastered the art of survival, turning weakness into strength. But the geopolitical storm is growing stronger. And the world is about to find out whether the poisonous shrimp can survive in waters ruled by two competing sharks.